First off, I just want to thank you all for coming to my session. I know there are a billion sessions going on right now, and over the course of SOLIDWORKS World, obviously there are just tons and tons of great sessions, so I really appreciate the fact that you guys chose this one to attend. So as you guys can see, this one is called Evaluating Your Parts KPIs, Key Performance Indicators, with the SOLIDWORKS API. And this kind of goes off template a little bit. They didn't give us this text block. But I was telling my coworker Heather in the back, with API presentations, I almost feel like they're a little bit strange because when you specify that it's for a beginner or intermediate or expert user, what do you really mean by that? Do you mean a SOLIDWORKS user, like in the CAD software, or do you mean an API user? So really this one is geared towards someone who would consider themselves intermediate level with SOLIDWORKS, but someone who is beginner with the API. So I want to show you guys how to evaluate some of the very standard key performance indicators using the SOLIDWORKS API at a very introductory level, just to see how you can get that interplay with your models, with the SOLIDWORKS automation capabilities, and also as sort of like an add-in, since I'm going to be doing some reporting, Microsoft Word. So I'm going to sort of lift the curtain on how all that works. So just to go a little bit deeper into the presentation scope, the presentation is going to expose you to various ways you can leverage, and I want to talk about this word leverage, what that entails. Because you probably hear that a lot. Whenever someone talks about APIs, they talk about this, they use this word leverage. So why do we use that word leverage, and what does it mean? So different ways you could leverage the API to tell you some pretty neat and telling things about your SOLIDWORKS models. All right, so we're actually going to look at a real live model that we have here. And it's going to give you some data, some background data in a report in Microsoft Word on that model, on some pretty key things. So the goal is really to open up your mind to what an API really is at its core. I know, how many of you have ever tried doing any coding at all? Okay. So how many of you have tried using the SOLIDWORKS API? Okay, so it's just recording macros or actually typing it out, or okay, so some recording. Add-ins, okay. So, and just to go over that again, I mean, the SOLIDWORKS CAD level, I'd say intermediate, and then API level, I'd say more beginner. So it's almost like a dual thing. It's talking about SOLIDWORKS CAD, but also the API in conjunction. So just a little bit of my background. My name is Sean O'Neill, certified SOLIDWORKS expert. Right now I'm the marketing manager at Prism Engineering, which probably makes no sense. It's like, why is a marketing manager at any company talking about API to any degree? My background is actually pretty interesting with regards to the whole marketing manager teaching the API thing. So the marketing manager thing is pretty new. I actually took over in the role about 4 months ago or so. But prior to that, I worked as a SOLIDWORKS applications engineer over at Prism Engineering. So I've done thousands and thousands of support cases, and like it says up there, very excited to be presenting here at SOLIDWORKS World. So let's get back to that word leverage. Why do I say leverage the API? I know with a lot of sort of beginner users, when I use the word leverage, I don't know that they fully grasp like what I mean by leverage. So what are APIs at their heart, and why do we use that word leverage? APIs are really just items exposed by developers, developers who made SOLIDWORKS, developers who made Microsoft Word, that make it really easy for other people like myself, yourselves, any third party, to be able to write codes that can perform imaginative operations of their choosing. So it's not stuff like, there's nothing in SOLIDWORKS that will spit out a Word report. There's nothing in Word, of course, that will look for SOLIDWORKS and then give you data on the model. So using those things in conjunction, I can make a report that's based on SOLIDWORKS data in Microsoft Word. So I'm really just leveraging things, like grabbing things and using them that are exposed maybe by SOLIDWORKS developers over here, and in conjunction, the Word developers, to give me this little report on the performance indicators of my part. So just a simple thought exercise, and this is sort of how my brain works and thinking about how I would go about looking at some of the SOLIDWORKS data and then maybe transferring it over in an evaluation tactic over to Microsoft Word. All right, so let's say, like for example, I just modeled this phone cradle and I want to have it inserted into a Word doc as a picture. How could I do that? You know, what's the sort of thought process that goes into that, and what's the thought process that went into the code that I'm going to present today? So the first thing I identify, a very basic level is what do I have and what can I use? I have the model, so I have the foam cradle. I have, you'll see soon, the football helmet that we made. And I can use the SOLIDWORKS API and the Microsoft Word API. Those are things that I can use, things I can leverage. Different bits of code I can leverage to do things in those programs without me having to click the buttons. Those of you who have written code to any level, understand that that's sort of what we're getting at here. And then the goal is to then identify what I need from each API, what I need from the API that's exposed, given to us by those developers from SOLIDWORKS, given to us by those developers from Microsoft. So I could be assisted, let's say in the SOLIDWORKS context, if I'm trying to save a picture of a model and I'm trying to put it into Microsoft Word, let's say that's my task. I could be assisted by, and there are a few ways you can do this, but maybe by the save as method in the SOLIDWORKS API. Now, at a SOLIDWORKS level, how many of you know that you can save pictures out of SOLIDWORKS? So you can do file, save as, save as a PNG, save as JPEG, Illustrator document, Photoshop document, TIFFs, tons of stuff. So those are things I know I can do. And then you can be assisted through the Microsoft Word API by the add picture function, which is again exposed for our leveraging by the Microsoft developers to the developers of Word. And then the question is, how did I know about this? How did I know about these things? I know, like, if it's not something you've done before, if you're at that beginner level, you might not know how I even knew that there was a save as method in SOLIDWORKS or an add picture method in a Microsoft Word API. So just to go over a few quick tips, I know not everyone is super familiar with using APIs, but the knowledge is truly at your fingertips, and these are just some different things I'll use. So glossaries, help documents, search engines. So using search engines, I wanted to automate saving as a JPEG. Maybe I'm not sure how to do that in SOLIDWORKS. Well, of course, how many of you have seen the SOLIDWORKS API help? Okay, so a few of you there. Sometimes I'll actually, and of you, does anyone have a preference for the web help versus the in-program help? Nope. I hate the web help sometimes. I honestly do. So this interface, you're probably more familiar, and probably like just a bit better. But search engines can be helpful when you're doing these sorts of things. You can still search save as JPEG SOLIDWORKS API, whereas if you're in this interface, it might be a little bit harder to do that because it's a little bit more rigid in how you can search things and search terms and all that. So if I search save as JPEG SOLIDWORKS API, what I'm most likely going to find is some sort of resource either through the web help or maybe something that was posted on like the SOLIDWORKS forums, which I'll get to in a second, that can show me that. But you can see here, this is just a screenshot of actually as I was doing this, because I don't, just like anyone, we don't all have this memorized. So I did save, and I found the save as method, and you can save the document to a different name, which is nice. So the SOLIDWORKS API help, extremely accessible, very easy to use, loads of examples. For those, I saw some of you were not familiar. If I go over to, let's see, escape. If I go over to SOLIDWORKS, let me minimize this for a second, and I go up to help, you can always uncheck this. For those of you who don't like the web help, if you uncheck that, go up to API help topics, and then right up here I can do save list topics, and then one of these guys is going to be save as right here. All right. Any questions so far? This might be a little bit of a review for those who aren't exactly at a beginner level, but I figured I'd go over it nonetheless. All right. Then I mentioned the SOLIDWORKS forums, definitely a good thing to look at. We have a very active API community. How many of you have done like PDM API? All right, so I posted something probably about a year ago on there. And it was really just about different ways of accessing file properties through PDM, or data card properties rather. And I quickly got close to like 1,000 views on that topic, which shows you that people, even though PDM is a segment, SOLIDWORKS CAD is huge, but PDM is a segment of that. It does get a ton of traffic, and I had like 3 people giving me really good answers. So this is definitely something I would look at as well. And it's possible that maybe someone has asked a similar question, which is quite possible because the API forums have been around for quite some time. So again, when you want to do something like this, let's say, evaluate a model, take its details and then put it into a Word doc, you ask, okay, what am I going to have? What's my starting point? If I want to design this in such a way that it can be repeatable, I can use this for many different part documents, not just one, one particular test case. What is my starting point? What are my preconditions? So you'll hear that a lot. So the precondition here is that I'm always going to have a model. So if I'm evaluating, or if I'm making a script or a macro or something that evaluates a model, I'm always going to have a model, right? That's a starting point. And then what can I use? Well, this solely depends on what your wants and needs are. And I'd say the purposeful question is, what do I want to evaluate and find? So I'm going to run through a few test cases here in showing you how this report works in using SOLIDWORKS and using Word in conjunction with one another. So a few of the things we're going to look at here, and I'd say these are pretty key things. So the names of underdefined sketches. There isn't really, to my knowledge at least, like a firm interface that shows you and will report to you exactly which sketches are underdefined. Now, why might this be useful? Well, those of you who've used SOLIDWORKS for at least even a little bit might know that it could be very useful. If you're reporting the names of underdefined sketches, maybe a dimension's missing and the value is depended on to be a certain value, but it's not because you didn't dimension it, it's not hooked correctly. So that could be a problem. I'd probably want to know if a sketch was underdefined. Features that take multiple seconds to rebuild. So you could always go to feature statistics and look at that. But this is just going to show you how you can take that and have it say, okay, well, I'm going to recognize that a feature takes longer than 2 seconds to rebuild. Give me that in a Word report. And then my third example is going to be names of features with errors. So in this example, I'm going to have the part open, but you don't necessarily have to have the part or even SOLIDWORKS open to do these things, to have a script run. And those of you who've written add-ins or anything to a more complex extent probably know this already. But the names of features with errors, it's probably hard to tell if you're not looking directly at the feature tree. And for the sketch example, that's definitely true, because if you're not looking at the feature tree and you don't have it shown in like a flat tree view and you want to see all these sketches that are underdefined, you're basically just using the eye test to see which sketches have minus signs next to them. So this is definitely something to consider, going along the same lines as the sketch example. In the sketch example, we're saying, okay, you're not really sure everything's right if you're using, let's say you're using analytical geometry. We're not using splines, which are a little bit different. But, you're depending on it to be right, but not everything is exactly constrained. And then with features, let's say I'm depending on a hole to be there, but the hole is gone because I didn't have it tied to some edge correctly, and I've shortened the distance of a boss extrude. Now the hole's not there. So these are all things that I'd say are good performance indicators of just general part health in SOLIDWORKS, regardless of whether you're making planes or dredging systems, or brackets. These are just fundamental things. So the goals for the Word API in this example, why am I using it? It's not uncommon in terms of automation. I just don't want to do it myself. I don't want to have to go through and see which sketches are underdefined every time for a part. Let's say, even if you wanted to make this a PDM add-in, you could have it so that every time you check something in, it ran the script on a part and then sent it to the CAD admin. You could do stuff like that. But goal is, whether I'm using PDM or not, I don't want to do it myself. And then you can do other things, like let's say if I wanted to, after having it go to Word, I wanted to save it as a PDF, right? You can do that pretty easily from Word. And as a word processing program, which SOLIDWORKS, as you guys know, is not, it helps me to report. And as an awesome CAD program, SOLIDWORKS gives me the data to report on. So I'm taking the data from SOLIDWORKS, then giving it to Word, and that gives me my finished product. All right, so without further ado, let's take a look. What do I need from the APIs? SOLIDWORKS API, all the things that it makes available to me, and the Word API to report on these key part performance indicators. And before I get into it, any questions at this point? Okay, yeah, just sort of laying the framework so far. Okay, so if I go over to SOLIDWORKS here. So how many of you have seen this model before? It's pretty cool. 3D Content Central is definitely another resource I'd recommend. This was actually a football helmet designed by Jordan Tadic, who works at SOLIDWORKS. And I did ask, even though it's a free, 3D Content Central is a free part repository, I did ask Jordan if it was okay for me to use this, because I think it's a very topical, cool model. So Jordan is very, very organized. You'll see from the left-hand side, he does some cool things here where he renamed his system-defined planes, front XY plane XZ and YZ, and probably saved it as a template too, and I think that's pretty smart. How many of you have ever done this? I don't want to get too off topic, but how many of you have ever added a weldment feature, even though it's not a weldment? So it's pretty cool, right? Because you get the cut list and you can report on the properties. It's pretty neat. So it's pretty much a hack to give you body properties, among other things. But you'll see he's very neat. Photos, any sketch photos he did for this one, the face mask, the visor, the separate components, the separate areas of the helmet are all very nicely segmented. So I'm most likely not going to find much here in the way of errors. Jordan is very deliberate about making sure that his models are clean and work nicely. But let's say, just to kind of be a troll here, you'll see just to get some of the facial areas clearly defined and more colorable by segment, he actually at the end has a split line feature here with a sketch right there. And what I'm going to do is actually break this just so I have at least something with an error. So using trim entities just to get rid of all of the actual geometry, not the construction geometry. And what a wonder, split line failed. Okay, so I at least have one error in the tree. Okay, so I'm going to take you over to the script that I wrote just for this presentation here. And with this script, I have a ton of notes. Generally, in any sort of development efforts, I would recommend putting a lot of notes, just because if someone else is looking at the code at all, it definitely gives them an idea. Because just like SOLIDWORKS, we all model different ways. It's very similar with this. We all might use different methods to get where we want to be in the sort of code that we write. All right, so for those beginners out there, what this portion is dedicated towards is really just telling our machines to allot space for certain types of data to be stored, even if this storage is sort of temporary, maybe used once, maybe used twice. So a lot of times, if I know I'm going to be using it very immediately in the first subroutine, I'll probably put it up here, especially if it's a very essential item, again, that isn't like very scope dependent based on a certain operation. So these sorts of things are things that you'll see in a lot of, most, if not all, SOLIDWORKS API projects, whether it's a macro, and in some verbiage. Right now, this is VBA. So I'm saying dim app or SW app. So that's just some arbitrary name that I'm giving it. I'm just saying SW app. I could have said bananas. I could have said lollipops. Could have said anything. As SLDworks.SLDworks. So this is specifically designed to give me or tell Windows that I'm going to have a variable that holds this very specific data type, SLDworks.SLDworks. And you can sort of understand that as at a simple level as being the SOLIDWORKS CAD application. So I'm basically telling Windows before I run it, make space for this. This is going to be used and I need it. And then dim SW model is pretty similar. So this is actually the interface that will control the part interface. So a lot of the commands, and it also includes like assemblies and drawings to an extent as well. But in this context with the helmet part, you can kind of understand this as being the SOLIDWORKS document. So dim SW model. So really anything before as, I'm just declaring a variable that could be any name, but usually you want it to be a name that is somewhat intuitive based on what you're trying to do. As SOLIDWORKS.model.doc2, which is the interface that gives you a lot of access to relevant part commands. Now, why does this make any sense to the VBA environment? You know, how does VBA know that SOLIDWORKS.SOLIDWORKS is an interface that can be used or leveraged? How does it know anything about SOLIDWORKS.model.doc2? You know, how does it know any of this? It'll get especially weird as I get down here to dim obj word and then comma obj doc. I'm basically saying, you know, make me objects, two separate objects. One that I've named obj word, one that's named obj doc. And you'll see my comment there. Anything in green with a single quote is just a comment that I made, so I can type whatever I want, but try to make it sensible, obviously. They're just holders for what will be my Microsoft Word program. All right, so that's obj word, and you know, again, just trying to make it sensible, and the Microsoft Word document. But again, just getting back to the original question, why does this mean anything to VBA? How does it know that there are interfaces, you know, such as SOLIDWORKS, model.doc2? Why does this make any sense to VBA? If I go up here to tools and references, you'll see I actually have a good bit of these, and they're not all essential for this project, but I have a good bit of these checked on. So tools references tells you which reference libraries based on the check marks are in effect. So you'll see I have a good bit of SOLIDWORKS ones. Again, probably a superfluous amount because I don't think I'm using all of these in this project. So I'm making that stuff available in my program. So my program here can reference those libraries that has the code, the leverageable code that the SOLIDWORKS developers made available to me. All right, and that's the only reason why anything I'm typing in this interface will do anything, really. And then here, Microsoft Word object library and the Office runtime library, same sort of thing at a very basic level. I'm just saying I want to be able to leverage Microsoft Word, and I want the stuff that's been made available to me from the Word developers to be here in this project so that I can use them. All right. Any questions on this part of it? Okay. So I'm going to cancel out. And again, that's the only reason why sort of, especially these two make sense and are registered as things that exist, really. So down here, how many of you are familiar with strings? Let's make sure everyone's alive. So it's the same idea. You know, I'm saying file path, and I could have named this flamingos. I could have named it anything, but it's going to be a file path. So I'm allotting a certain amount of data, telling Windows, hey, I'm going to need this later. I'm going to need a space for this. File path, path no extension, new file path. And this is sort of, and you'll see in a minute, I'll show you actually how, you know, we can take away the end letters of a string, like a file path, like SLDPRT, and then replace it with something else. Then path size will go hand in hand with that. So it's really just an integer, and then some other ones that are more feature relevant that we'll get to in a second. So I'm really, again, just giving Windows the heads up that I'm going to be using some variables of these types, like integer, string, and then some interface level items as well. All right, let me get this into plain sight. By the way, don't tell Jordan I did this to his helmet. Split line really did an integral part in the aesthetic here. So, like I mentioned a little bit ago, I did comment this quite a bit, and I do try to make a good habit of doing that. But you'll see most of the time if I'm doing comments, I'll either put them next to the code that is relevant, or I'll actually put it right above, you know, a line above the code. And that's really just a style preference. There's no change in functionality. So with my first bit of instruction in this routine that we're going to run through, which is submain, it's just the first and really the only subroutine in here. I'm saying set SWApp, which if you can recall, I allotted space for right up here when I declared it, right? I said SW app will contain this sort of data. So I'm saying set SW app equal to application SOLIDWORKS. So at that point, that's where I'm engaging SOLIDWORKS. Now I'm saying SOLIDWORKS exists and it's going to be leveraged. All right, it's going to be leveraged here. And then in the very next line, what you'll see is set SW model, which you'll recall up here is really where we have all of the sort of leverageable model information at sort of like its highest level. I'm saying set SW model equal to that SOLIDWORKS apps active document. All right, so the only document I've opened is this one. And since I have it open right in the forefront, since it's really the only thing I have, it's going to set SW model. It's going to understand SW model from here on in to represent this document, this helmet. All right, so I haven't started running through it yet, but why don't I just give it a shot? So how many of you are comfortable with VBA to any degree? So I use this one. I've used VB.NET. I've done C++, but I use this one because it's probably the easiest to follow at a beginner level because it's not like crazy. Like it's my fiance says that when I do this stuff, I'm talking to aliens. I don't know if it's the colors or just the verbiage, but or the syntax, but it's probably the easiest to sort of grasp and understand. All right, so at this point, that file path string, which again I could have named flamingos, I just named a file path because I plan on getting a file path and storing it in that string. I'm saying from the model, get the path's name. So I asked a bit ago if you guys were familiar with or comfortable with at all VBA. One of the reasons I asked that is just to get an idea of your level of comfort, but also to kind of go through, the tips and to see if I'm introducing anything new to you guys in terms of some of the cycling we can do. So if you press F8, and it sounds like a good bit of you might know this, if you press F8, that basically allows you to step through line by line your code. All right, so I pressed F8, and one thing you'll notice after I do that is it takes us to this first line. So it's taking us to that subroutine. Nothing's really happened yet. I'm just stepping into the subroutine. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to keep automating tasks as we go and explaining them. Okay? So I moved forward once again. So I just keep pressing F8. It goes by line in execution. Really useful for any sort of debugging because I wrote this a while ago, but if I try to type it now, I might have a typo, or maybe I'm calling something that shouldn't be called. Maybe I'm going and trying to get a piece of data that isn't what I need or what is applicable, so things might crash out. All right, so set SW model equal to the active document, so that anything that's called from there will be understood to be that helmet. All right, and then file path equals SW model dot get path name. So if I move over that, since I've passed that line of code, and if I hover over file path now, file path used to be empty. It was just declared as a string. There was nothing in there. My computer knew it had to keep memory for it. It had to be available. But it didn't contain anything. Well, now it does, because I've passed by that line of code, and I went and said, with that model, get path name. All right. And then right here, you'll see I do debug print, or debug.print file path, which is really going to give me, in this immediate window, that file path string. So the reason why I do that is just to give you guys a better look. You'll see, just like a lot of tooltips in Windows, if you hover over them, if it's too long, it might not show you the full thing. So I just want to show you why I'm kind of extracting this at this time. So if I press F8, and I scroll down here, when you do get path name from ModelDoc2, what it actually does, it gets you the full path name. So in my mind, that might be a little bit confusing at first. It's, because that's almost subject to interpretation. If you read it in the API help, you'll get a very clear idea of what it is when it says full path. But you'll see what it does. So it takes the folder path, obviously, but it also gives you the file name, which is what I meant by that. It's like you don't know if it's actually going to give you the file name or just the folder location. So it gives you the full file name with .sldrp at the end. So the idea here in getting the path, what I'm trying to do is I'm actually trying to get the path such that I can take away SLDPRT, plug in JPEG or PNG, and then save it. I can maybe save it to a temp location, or save it to a more or less volatile location. Okay. And then here what I'm saying is path size equals strings.len. So this is there is a function within strings where you can get the actual length of the file path. So it basically looks at that string, which is right here in the immediate window, and counts how many spaces I have. How many of you have worked with dispatch and PDM at all? Okay, so there's some pretty similar tools in dispatch that can help you to do this too. All right, so if I jump ahead, fate. Okay, so then I say path no extension, which is another one of those strings I allotted space for, equals strings.left, file path, and then comma. And what that's looking for is just, it's looking to give me X amount of spaces of characters from the named string, so from file path. How many number of characters? This number. So path size was an integer I declared. Path size was 92. So I'm basically saying 92 minus 6. Why 92 minus 6? Because SLDPRT has 6 letters. So what I'm basically telling you to do is just take that entire string, but don't take SLDPRT. And again, there are other ways to do this, but this is just one way. Okay? And then basically from that, store that string value in path no extension. All right, so path no extension is going to equal that sum of characters. So I'm now going to print path no extension. And sorry, right there. Okay, should have done a return there. So basically it starts here at C. You'll see as I go, it's now a football helmet dot. All right, so the SLDPRT is gone. And then new file path is just going to be path no extension, which we see right here. It ends in that dot. And so I'm adding something to the string, quote, JPG. Okay? So if I jump forward, print that, you'll see now it's .jpg. Okay, so from here, and I'll zoom out a little bit, you'll see one of my comments is just making the SOLIDWORKS model picture look pretty. So you don't necessarily have to do this, but what I did just to show you more stuff, I guess, is to, I'm going to rebuild this model. And this is really where, at the SOLIDWORKS level, you kind of see, at a visual level at least, that it's hooked in. Because you'll see that the hourglass is going to start spinning. Okay, so it spun just for a second there. And then show named view. So swmodel.showNamedView2, you'll see it says, quote, asterisk isometric. So that's a named view of my model. Now, the reason why I'm doing that is because in my Word document, the one I'm making a report of, I actually want the isometric view of the model to show up every time. All right, so you'll see as I go ahead and do F8 to step forward. It looks pretty good so far. It's definitely an isometric view, so you can see down there it says isometric with a little asterisk there. I'm going to fix this up in a second, though, when I do swmodel .view zoom to fit 2. Okay, so it looks a little better. It's a little hidden behind my little pane here, but that's okay. All right, and then last but not least, in terms of getting the picture, swmodel.saveas3. And there are a few different save as methods that can be used. This one accepts like a very, or it allows at least a very small amount of parameters. So really I'm just saying, I guess at a basic level here, just save this model as the name that I have in new file path, which is that string.jpg. Okay, so I jump ahead. You kind of saw it spun a little bit, and it's going to save that right in the same directory because I took it right from the models directory. So if we were to go there right now, which I won't, there's actually a JPEG sitting right there in the same model folder with the same name as the file. Any questions so far? Okay? So right here, this is where it kind of gets funny with Word because we're actually going to use it. So set obj Word or FDM or plastic or whatever. Create object Word.application. All right, so in Windows, what I'm saying is launch Microsoft Word. That's basically what I'm saying here. Create an object that is Microsoft Word. Okay, so if you look down here, actually, I have a lot of windows open. A bunch of marketing stuff here, SOLIDWORKS, a bunch of other programs. You'll see once I pass that line of code, what might you expect to see at that point? You might expect to see Word, right? So jump down, no Word. Okay. So this is all just to show, and right here I'm going to open up a document that I have pre-made as a template. It just has like a picture on there that has our company logo and that kind of stuff. Because there's no reason to have the API generate that every time. Going to go forward. All right, still no Word, right? So Word's not here. And then here I'm saying the Word object. So object Word.visible equals true. So this is something in Word that is made available to us from the developers where I can say, hey, Word, present yourself. So if I jump past that, you'll see there it is. Okay? So SOLIDWORKS has something similar. And if you guys have ever used PDM and had it print a PDF for you, you'll sometimes see SOLIDWORKS will flash in the corner for a second. It's because it's sort of written on the same backbone. PDM in those capacities uses the SOLIDWORKS API much like I'm doing now. All right, so I jump back. So in a lot of ways, in terms of evaluating this stuff, what I'm actually doing is I'm basically telling these programs to do things I don't want to do every time. And it does it much quicker than I ever could. So in that sense, with that said, with that Word doc, that object doc here, which I defined when I opened up this file at this path, that document, which we just saw, which had the Prism logo on it, select this shape. All right, so obj.shapes textbox12.select. So you might be thinking, like, how the heck did I know that like this box here was textbox12? Like, Word doesn't really tell you that. I don't really see that anywhere. Those of you who have messed around with the SOLIDWORKS API, if you've gone through the book or if you've used the recorder to any extent, you know that the recorder is not really good at knowing what you're thinking. It can't know that. But it is somewhat good at recording your screen activity as you click things and execute things. And Word has a recorder too, just like Excel does. It might not be used as frequently as Excel does because of the common applications of Excel, but it does have a recorder. So if you show the Developer tab in Word, you can record a macro in Word. So really, I had no idea that was called textbox12. I honestly didn't know. I was just messing around and I found this. So I went to record macro, and when I went to record macro, I clicked on this little box here. Now the reason why I wanted to select that text box is because I wanted it to select the text box, and then once you start typing after you select the text box in Word, I know that, because I've messed around, I know that it'll start putting characters in that box. So instead of having the picture that I'm going to have in there get pasted here, or here, 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 I know that if I have that box selected, because I've done it manually, I know that'll put any text I have floated over to Word in that box. So I went to record macro, I clicked the box, I stopped it. Then if I go here, I'll just show you what I did. It said active document dot shapes. So active document in the Word context at least, this is just in Word, dot shapes, parentheses, textbox12. So that told me, oh, that's your name, textbox12. So when I do this whole song and dance in SOLIDWORKS, I'll know what you're called, and I can call you very easily, because I'm always going to use this template. The template's always going to be the same. The output will, if I use any other part, it's going to be a little bit different. Okay, so just a little trick I did. Okay, so when I say obj.shapes, and notice it is an active document in this context because the variable is actually pointed at obj.doc, which is the document I opened. All right. So obj.doc, the doc that I have open, that's just the variable's name. .shapes, select. Okay. All right, I'll step forward. All right, and here's where we have the first foyer, I guess you could say, into adding or having SOLIDWORKS talk to Word. All right, so obj.word.selection, .inline shapes, .add picture. Again, I Googled how do you add a picture into a Microsoft Word document, and I said API at the end, and I found this. So these are the things it wants. All right, so it wants the name or the string where the file path is stored. Remember, we saved that JPEG, and we had that string extrapolated from it. So I'm using that same string because I just saved the JPEG there, and I know it's there. So new file path. And then another parameter it takes is link to file. So add picture takes a parameter called link to file. I say false. Now you could keep it true. If you kept it true, it would try to update with the file. Let's say the JPEG changed in some way. Maybe you added some annotations to it, or you did something else with it. If you said link to file true, it would always try to look back and check to see whether anything had changed because it would be linked. Since it says false, it just pastes it in there and it doesn't try to link to anything on your hard drive. Okay, and save with document just says, just save the JPEG into the document. Don't worry about the original path anymore. Okay, so if I go down a little further, it says objword.selection.typeText. Again, I just said, how do I type text into Word API? And then I saw type text was something I could do. It's very simple. You'll see it's really just typing in that command, and then you say parentheses and add whatever string you want. So full file path. I actually just put it in there just so you could see what the file path is in the report of the actual SOLIDWORKS document. So if I go here and I say F8, step forward, I'll go over to the Word doc, and you'll see full file path, the file path. Okay? And you'll also see, I don't think I pointed this out yet, the broken football helmet. Any questions so far? Okay. So let me head back to SOLIDWORKS and code. All right, so if I keep going down. So this is another thing. I wanted to know how to do a character return because I didn't know how to do it. I really hadn't messed with the Word API too much. So I wanted to see how do you do a character return. So it's the same thing as we had up here where we actually had text added. But the code for a character return, you just do CHR parentheses 11, which I found just by looking. How many of you have ever gone to Stack Exchange? It's cool. It's a really good website. It's not a SOLIDWORKS website. It's just a general developer website. So I saw somebody had that in sample code, and I thought, okay, I'll do that. That makes sense. All right, so I do 2 character returns, and there are other ways you could simplify this and make it more efficient, but I just typed it out just to give a better visual. All right, so type text. So this is where I get into some of the KPI stuff, right? So I'm saying any under constrained sketches will be specified below. You'll notice I don't have this in a variable or anything. I just have it printing static text to the Word document. The screen's getting all weird for some reason. Because that's not going to change. If I have under constrained sketches, it'll print them below. If I don't, I still preface it with any under constrained sketches. So if there aren't any there, then that means that it's probably fine. You could build more logic into that, but that was just a basic way to kind of make that make sense. All right, so another character return. All right, so I made another variable. I could have said feet. I could have said feet, F-E-E-T. I could have said toes. And that's equal to SW model first feature. I'm not sure why this is glitching out. I think it might be the Windows magnifier. So it's not doing it anymore. Okay. And here's where I do, I actually use a function here. So you'll see it says call select feet. Not sure what that is yet. Call select feet and then feet right there. So it's starting with the first feature in the model. So if I head over to call select feet and then press F8, you're going to see it's going to jump. So it jumps down to that function called select feet. And then that first feature is where it's going to start. Okay? So here's where I start to build a little bit more logic into it. So I say while feature temp, or while not feature temp is nothing, which wouldn't it be awesome if everyone talked like that? It'd be very confusing. All right, so while feature temp contains anything, which is going to cycle through the tree and sort of examine it, it's going to take the feature name as a string. All right, so it's going to I declare that right there, and then feature name equals feature temp dot get type name 2. So remember, the goal of this little exercise is to see if the sketches that we're looking at are under constrained or not. Okay? So get type name, and you'll see below equals the below equals profile feature if it is a sketch. Get type name 2 returns explanations, or return explanations show this off pretty well. So basically what I'm getting at there is how do I know that a sketch will be defined as a profile feature? Should show you if I go over to the API help and I go to index and get type name 2. All right, so I just type that in. So the API help, especially if you're not doing the web help, is pretty useful. So if I go to the return value, the return value that it gives you, it says, well, I give you the feature type, and it says see remarks. So the remarks are down here, and that's basically going to tell me as far as the types that it can get, what return you can expect to get. So a lot of times in my testing, I'll sort of cycle through these just to see well, I see visually that it should be at this spot in the tree. I wonder what it calls a boss extrude. I wonder what it calls a sweep. But if I go down here, just to show you, I'm going to do Control F and find it. Profile feature. Next. Okay. So you'll see for sketch features, it'll return as a profile feature. Okay? So it just goes to show if I'm looking for a constraint status of something, I don't want to look for a constraint status of a boss extrude or an axis or something weird like that. I'm just looking for the constraint status of a profile feature, and that's how I tell the system to start examining that, because if it says that it's a profile feature, that's how I sort of know that it should be looking for the constraint status. Okay, so I'm going to go through this. Okay, so feature name is a profile feature. Now this will go through pretty much the entire tree, and it'll keep interrogating it, and it'll keep saying, okay, next line item, next line item, next line item. Are you a sketch? If you're a sketch, let me check your constraint status. So you'll see here I have logic built in that says, if feature name equals, the type name of the feature, and when I say features in this context, I basically mean boss extrude, I mean axes, I mean sketches. So that's just the way it sort of terms it. If it equals profile feature, then start to look at specific things about it, because I want to see if it's underdefined as a sketch or not. Okay? So here, in the sketch interface, it's saying, or we could say, get constrained status from the sketch. And I say, okay, well, if constraint int is or does not equal 3, then type the text sketch and then the name. So feature temp, the feature that I'm looking at right now, .name, so that returns a string with the name, is not fully constrained or is not properly constrained. So just to kind of get back to that, how do I know that in the sketch interface that get constrained status, why do I know that 3 as a return value means anything? All right, so because I basically said if it's not 3, then say there's something wrong with the sketch essentially. All right, so how do I know that? If I go to API help topics and I type in get constrained status, you'll see a few show up here, because you can do it with assemblies too, with assembly mates to see if that's constrained. But I'll do the iSketch interface. Okay. So it says gets the current constraint status of the sketch. The return value, which again I'm concerned with, says constraint status as defined in SW constraint status. So if I click on that, this gives me sort of the values that I can extract as far as like what that data means. So if it's on a sketch and it returns something that is not 3, and you'll see the description for this one, 3, means fully constrained, I can then deduce that it is not fully constrained, and I can report that it's not fully constrained. Now, does that mean it's underdefined? Not necessarily, because you'll see there are other things here, like anyone ever work with any funky splines and see it says like no solution if you kind of drag it too much? So that's something that could happen. Over constrained, we've all seen that if you have too many constraints. So it basically means I'm just trying to report if it's properly constrained or not. All right, so I'll head back. And I'll sort of keep stepping through this. All right, so you'll see it just keeps cycling through, keeps cycling through, keeps cycling through. I'm actually going to play through the rest of this. So if I go up to the top here and just say continue or F5, it'll just kind of finish the script for me. Okay, so I went ahead and did that. And if I go over to the Word doc, you'll see after I printed the file path, which we saw, and then it went ahead and said any under constrained or not properly constrained sketches will be specified below. It then gave me the listing of a bunch of sketches that are not properly constrained. Okay, so it went through, gave me the names. And again, this would be somewhat difficult to discern if you're just looking at the feature tree. If you weren't fully familiar with, the layout of the feature tree when something's not properly constrained, it just wouldn't be ultra easy. All right. Now, some of the other stuff it went through, you'll see here, it finished up the report and it said feature flex 2 takes a long time to rebuild. Feature split line 15 contains an error and should be examined. These are some other things that I actually had the report do for me. And if I look and pop back over to the code just to kind of explain what that goes through. So I believe where we left off here before we got to the function was right about here. So let's say in order to find out whether there are features in the tree that just take a long time to rebuild. And by the way, if any of you after the presentation, I know we're kind of running short here. If any of you after the presentation want a copy of this, just come up to me and give me your business card or email, and I'll send it over to you. But it's basically saying, okay, so let's put the feature manager in memory. And then let's set a variable. Again, it could be flamingos or anything you want. Let's set this variable equal to the feature statistics of the model. Now, if we've used SOLIDWORKS before to some degree, we know that you can get feature statistics by clicking on the feature statistics logo and examining those statistics there. But this kind of just gives you it in a report. So here what I'm doing is I'm taking the feature statistics feature names as they show in the feature statistics. So really this is actually just giving you the names of the features in an array, a string array. All right, so it might say boss extrude 1, boss extrude 3, cut extrude 1. And I can sort of, and it's an indexable array. All right, so it's a 0 indexed array. So it just kind of goes in that order. And then I say for feature update times, which is in the same order, give me an array of update times and fill it in here. So this variable contains all of the feature names. This variable contains all of the update times. And then as I go down, I make this little iterator. It's just a variable named iter. Could name it I. You'll commonly see I as an iterator. For 0 to the upper bound of feature names. So basically from 0, which is 0 indexed, to the last name in that array that I pulled. Let's go ahead and let's see if that feature's update time, go through 0, go through 1, go through 2, go through 3 in order. Let's check each feature and see if the update time is longer than 2. Let's say 2 is just, and you can build more logic into this, but let's say 2 is like this magic number that if I want to know which features take longer than 2 seconds to rebuild, because I want to consider maybe making a configuration where they're not shown, maybe they're suppressed. Then place into Word feature, and then whatever iteration it's at, whatever number it's at in that array of names, feature, and then that feature name right there, takes a long time to rebuild. Okay, so it just keeps going through, keeps going through, keeps going through, And you'll see the only feature that actually took longer than 2 seconds was flex 2. So depending on whether that was an essential feature or not, you might, again, want to consider suppressing it or getting rid of it or what have you. All right, so if I do a sanity check here and I go up to performance eval, you'll see these two sketches get pretty close, and this is just a sanity check, but flex 2 is actually close to 6 seconds of rebuild time, which is about a quarter of the total time. So it's over 2 seconds, therefore it was reported in the Word report. All right. And then just to go down a little bit more. So remember I said I went over in that split line feature, I broke it intentionally, just so it would show as being a feature with an error. So this is sort of the same thing. So it says error equals, and error is just an integer. You'll see I declared it, I named it error, and I said, okay, you can hold integer values. Error is equal to the feature that I'm on, and then get its error code. So the error code may be nothing because it's not erroring, and for the most part, most of these features are not erroring. It's just that one split line which I intentionally broke. So it just loops through those features, and again, there probably are more efficient ways you could do this, but just to kind of show you a very basic way you get it done. And it says, okay, if error, this integer for a feature, is greater than 0, if it's greater than 0, say the feature and whatever name that is as you iterate through contains an error. And then keep going through and use get next feature to keep going through the feature tree. So just to show you why greater than 0. Well, if I go to get error code 2 and double click on it, it says gets the error code for this feature. All right, so it's going to give me an integer that represents an error code. If I go down to return value, it says feature error code as defined in an SW feature error. If I click on that, you'll see there are tons of reasons why you might get a warning or an error on something. But what I'm really just trying to focus on is whether it's unsound or not. So I don't have to address each and every one of these and include them in my code. I just have to find out, what is the condition where it tells me there's nothing wrong with it. And that's this one. The only one really there is 0. So if it's greater than 0, if it's not 0, in any way you want to write that, then there's probably no real error in SOLIDWORKS terms, at least. Okay. So I go through, and then, of course, it shows me that the split line is the only feature that contains an error to some extent and should be examined. So this sort of thing could be useful if maybe you're a CAD admin and you just want to sort of run the gamut of some very key but very basic things that should be okay with a part. In terms of its performance indicators. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. So some other things you might want to consider maybe at home. We're just about out of time here. Whoops, sorry about that. Let's go back to you. So maybe you want to check on, and this could be big with like sheet metal parts or maybe imported models. This is also pretty big. So it's verification on rebuild, success or failure status, maybe something to look at and try as like a personal project. So this checks new/change features against all faces of the model, not just adjacent faces, which is what SOLIDWORKS does by default. And again, it's potentially helpful with imported models. Maybe another thing you could do that sort of falls on the same line of some of the stuff I did with features in this presentation is look at feature creator statistics. So maybe calculate the number of features created by a user, what percentage of features were made by a certain user. That stuff's available through the API, and it kind of gives you insight to some extent into who's responsible for the bulk of the part modeling. Any questions? I know I've asked throughout the presentation, but just about done. We're just about out of time. Okay, so up here, it's my email address, soneil@prismeng.com. If you guys wanted to reach out to me on LinkedIn, you could do linkedin.com/in/soneil24. if you guys have any questions after the presentation, or even if you want to email me and say, hey, could you just give me that code, give me your presentation. I think most of the stuff should be available pretty soon, the recording, as well as the PDF. But I'd be glad to send it over to you ahead of time. And go back there if you guys wanted to grab that. All right. And one last thing. I want to thank you so much for your time and your attendance. I hope you got something out of the presentation. If you guys wouldn't mind just going onto the app and filling out the survey, just of course gives them an idea of sort of what you thought of the presentation, what you thought of the content. It kind of gives me a good idea as well of how you guys did. All right. Thank you very much.